definition, Bygone framework. I wanted to start with defining those words. So bygone, belonging to an earlier time, and framework, an essential supporting structure of a building. Two words I would like to pull from these definitions is belonging and essential. This collection of Kevin's work reminds us of a time that we can all feel a sense of belonging to with a shared memory of these buildings. The space and time when these buildings were in their glory days has maybe been forgotten, but not by all. Kevin focuses on something beautifully, somewhat heartbreaking, but essential to focus on: the unfortunate neglect and fall of these buildings throughout the Rust Belt. Something that usually is swept under the rug and not spoken about, he brings to light by using stunning colors and strokes to show the beauty of these bygone frameworks through the artist's eye. And in my opinion, he's done a wonderful job. Now, I would also like to mention that outside of this artist talk, if you want more, we also did one that is on YouTube, so you can go back and hear more about Kevin's thoughts. And outside of this, Kevin's show is going to be sadly coming down soon, but he's also in the Oak Room Artist, which will be having an opening reception along with Jerry Weiss's show, which is a pairing of a painter with our collection, and then Craft Revolutionary and Now, which is craft items, artifacts that are paired with current artists working in that craft today, with items on loan from Fort Plain Museum and the New York State Museum. And that opening will be on August 29th at 2 p.m. So you get to see Kevin again.
I'm not going to be here.
Oh, just kidding, you won't see Kevin again. But with that,
Tickets to McCabe.
that also sounds pretty exciting. I will let Kevin take over, and if you have any questions for me, please come up after. Once Kevin's done, we'll do an informal walk around in the gallery, and you can come speak to either one of us. I just please ask that you do not bring drinks into the gallery. Thank you. All right, you want the microphone off?
Sure. Thank you, Kelso. Am I being heard okay here?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Not really.
Closer to my mouth here?
There you go.
Okay, all right. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful, beautiful day, and I know you could be outside having fun. Instead, you're gonna come in here and listen to me. So, but thank you very, very much, and I wanna thank the Arkell. It was such an honor for them to ask me to have this show, and I really felt like so touched and honored, as I said. A lot of what this talk's going to be is kind of anticipating what questions that I get so much from different people about my work and where I came from, my background, and that sort of thing. So I've got about 60, 70 slides here that I'm going to run through and give some commentary. But I also thought so much of my work comes out of my sketchbooks, and it's such an important part of my process. So while I'm talking, I'm just gonna pass around a few sketchbooks. And this way, if you get bored with what I'm saying, you can look at the sketchbooks. Keep yourself busy. I'll stick these back here. They're set. My sketchbooks are, I always carry my sketchbook with me, and I'm always working with my sketchbooks. Just yesterday I was on a bike ride and I went through Johnstown and I stopped and I sat down. You can find it in the back of one of the small sketchbooks. I did a quick pen and ink sketch of the new statue they have down there, up there, of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and that was kind of cool. And it's just, and what these things do is they put ideas into my head for future paintings. That's why they're so important. These sketchbooks are not precious, so if you drop them on the floor or stick your fingers all over the pages or anything, I don't care, it's not important to me. But it's my whole process comes out of these sketchbooks, it really does. So you can just flip through there. Kelso explained the title, and let's just go. People say, you know, how long have I been an artist? Was I the artistic kid? Well, I was. I remember, my first remembrance of it was 2nd grade. I was always helping the teacher with the bulletin boards and putting up everything, and I used to get a big kick out of that. And I guess all that positive reinforcement is what kept me going till today, you know, because that was only, what, maybe 30 years ago when I was in 1st grade, or 2nd grade. Anyhow, I didn't really bring in any of my youthful stuff, but this was from my high school yearbook. I did the divider pages for the yearbook. And I just have it up here to show you that at that time, I was interested in design, and I was already interested in architecture. And just playing around, this was ink wash. So by that point, this is my first publication. I just thought of that. I had to realize that because it was the high school yearbook. I didn't even think of that. There's another one. Oh, wait a minute. Am I pressing the right button? Whoop, I went too far. I got it. Okay, that was another one. Just the up and down here, right?
The side this way.
Oh, that way.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All these arrows go in different directions. Okay. Incidentally, you may be able to figure out where was this guy's high school. It was in St. Croix, Virgin Islands, and that's an old sugar mill. So I was already also interested in how the old buildings were falling apart, the deserted sugar mills. There was no sugar industry by that point, and that it was early on. You know, I don't know how it happened. I remember as a kid always wandering around my neighborhood, going into, sneaking into old buildings, deserted buildings, and hanging out by the warehouses. There was some industry down at the end of my block, and there was also a railroad, the Long Island Railroad went down at the end. So all these things were influencing me, even though I didn't know that. Let's see. Also, this influenced me. This was Charles Birchfield, one of my all-time favorite watercolors, who, incidentally, is having a show right now it's called just the Munson now? At the Munson, I definitely want to get out there to see his show. He's originally from Ohio, but spent most of his life in Buffalo, in the Buffalo area. This was on, is anybody here from Long Island? Okay, can't be right. This was on the phone book when I was a kid. Yeah. This was on the phone book, and I used to look at this picture over and over. And do you remember, Laura? I used to look at this picture over and over. I didn't know who Charles Birchfield was or anything. And then later on, somehow I became a big Birchfield fan. And you can see, again, the architectural thing, and a little bit of the human activity going on. The sense of place, the sense of home. Then, another one of my early influences, I was trying to find the World Book Encyclopedia article on painting online, and I could not seem to navigate the web to find it. But I was teaching a class at a senior center the other day, and what do I see sitting there but the World Book Encyclopedia? And I hope no one's looking for P right now, because I took it with me. And in the painting section, a lot of the artists who wanted, I would spend hours and hours looking through this section. I just spent so many hours. And then now that I look through it again, I realize I've seen so many of these paintings for real. And these are not the actual paintings in that article, but these are some of the artists who are in that article. Being a watercolorist, how did I get into watercolor? I got into watercolor after I graduated college. I was doing some watercolors when I graduated with a degree in art education in 1977. During my college days, I did do some watercolor, but mainly I focused on oils and printmaking, and a little bit of sculpture. And when I got out, I got a job in Gloversville, and I was living in Gloversville, so I am connected to the area from soon after college. I was pretty well connected to this area up here. I know upstate people don't like to call it upstate, but it's still upstate to me. Watercolor was just so much easier for me because you know, I didn't have the smell of oil paints in my apartment and all that, and it was very portable, and I could carry it around, and I love working outdoors, so I could bring it outdoors easily. And so, of course, naturally, I got attracted to the watercolorists, and Winslow Homer, of course, probably the ultimate American watercolorist when you think of American watercolor would be Winslow Homer. And how did he influence me? I just love his arrangement, his design, his composition, his arrangement of shapes, his contrast and drama. But I don't like his blue skies, too many blue skies. And, so Homer was another influence who also I knew about from this painting article. Van Gogh I was really into Van Gogh when I was into high school, really into, and I would do paintings with lots of thick brush strokes and everything, and try to be expressionist and all that, not having any clue what I was doing. I never took any art in school. The small school I went to in my last couple of years had no art, so I just never got around to it. So, but I am very influenced by Van Gogh, especially his this is like a combination drawing watercolor, I believe, and his early pen and ink drawings. He would use a reed pen that he carved himself to do these drawings. And there's just so much expression and movement, a lot of movement. I love movement in paintings. I don't like static looking paintings. I like paintings that keep you going through the painting, your eye going through. And I think Van Gogh, of course, was very accomplished at doing that. Who else we got here? Edward Hopper, of course, another one who, a big influence on me. His work, I would say, has a more static look to it, and usually you see mostly his oil paintings. And a lot of his this is a watercolor, this is my favorite watercolor by him. And it's, for him, this is quite loose. This is quite a lot of motion and movement going on. I just love the way he caught the light and the shapes and just the way he handles the foliage on the side and in the foreground, and just, you know, not as finished as his usual work. And I just thought process, that's why I'm passing around the sketchbooks too. To me, process is so important to me. You know, just having the way you go about getting to your finished product is, to me, more important than the finished product. Like when I go to a museum now, I find myself going into the drawing section more than the actual finished paintings. I want to see the sketches and drawings that were there for the painting. And I think with Hopper, this was probably a throwaway for him. He probably did, I don't know that for sure, but he probably didn't think of it as a real finished painting. So he influenced me. Again, being a watercolorist. Cézanne was known for some of his watercolors, but I really don't like his watercolors. However, I was crazy about Cézanne when I first got to college. You know, I just discovered Cézanne, and I'd be down at the Met in New York City, and I would just spend hours looking at Cézanne. And I'm not sure exactly what it was, except that I liked how his paintings were so structured. And maybe because I'm into structures and houses, his paintings were like built up, like he created I'll use that word framework again, you know, like he created a framework and just got everything in there. And I also know why I was maybe influenced by him. A painting very similar to this still life by him, my mother must have bought at the Billy Blake or the Floyd Bennett on Long Island or someplace, and she had a Cézanne hanging over the fireplace when I was growing up, you know, a reproduction of a Cézanne. With the apple, it wasn't this one, but it had the apples and a lot of the same extra stuff. So I think looking at that Cézanne growing up influenced me. And I like the way he builds up his color with separate strokes. And, oh yeah, articulate your planes. Now, Sandy, you wanted to know what the heck I was talking about here. This was one of my teachers at New Paltz, Alex Minuski. He was I guess you'd call him an expressionist in his painting style. His teachers, he had a lot of the people that had escaped Germany after the war and came over here to the US to teach. A lot of them went to the Art Students League down in New York City. Those were his teachers. He came out of that abstract expressionist period, and one of his main teachers was Hans Hofmann. But he also, George Gross was one of his teachers. And George Gross, I didn't have a picture of George Gross, but George Gross has an almost cartoony way of doing his figures and stuff. And I've always been influenced by comic books and things like that, which is, I'm getting off here. But anyhow, articulate your planes, really what he meant was just show where, if you have one surface, clearly show where it changes direction or changes color, and put some life and energy into the planes that describe an object. And that's really what he meant by articulate your planes, and sort of a private joke for me, because when we were in college, we'd look at each other's work and go, yeah, you gotta articulate your planes some more, because we kept hearing it over and over again. But it did influence me. I mean, to the point where some of the paintings I was doing in college were just wacky. I mean, they were crazy. They were I was very much into German expressionism too. But I thought this was even a better example of articulating your planes. Thomas Hart Benton. You can see how there's so much movement and action, and everything is, just flowing around. You can clearly see where one side of an arm is and where the top of the arm begins. Very, very strong forms and planes, very 3D. And coincidentally, Thomas Hart Benton was a teacher of Jackson Pollock. So there was a connection there. I love Benton's work. If you haven't been out of the New York State Museum, he's got a few pieces down there, which came from way upstate somewhere. Way upstate, really upstate, something like Malone or someplace like that. Now this is Birchfield, looking a little different from that first Birchfield that was on the telephone book. And this is, when I first started seeing, I'm hoping there's some of this kind of stuff out at the, have you seen the show at the Mumford? This kind of stuff there? Cool stuff. Notice the dates when it was painted, 1917 to 1952. If you could see this closer, if this was a better view, what you would see is, you would see some seams. In other words, this central part here with the telephone poles and some of these houses and the fields would have been a watercolor maybe about that size, maybe a full sheet watercolor. And then what he did was he attached with paste or tape or somehow, he added extra sheets of watercolor paper on to make these things huge. I mean, bigger than what you're seeing here, really big. And added them on, and he became very expressionistic and a lot of movement and motion going on. These things definitely influenced me. Like things are like you can hear the sound going through the telephone wires, that sort of thing. And a lot of times when I'm painting, when I paint outside, even at home a lot of times, well, at home I'll listen to music, but that's usually I'm working from sketches. But most of my original sketching, when I sketch and draw outside, I just listen to what I'm hearing around me, and I think it influences my work. And I think it influences, he has all these little signs and signals for what a bird sounds like and that sort of thing. The industrial, a lot of my stuff, as you notice, has some industrial things like grain elevators like this. And over the years I got into this guy too, Reginald Marsh. I love Reginald Marsh. You could say he was kind of the social realism of the 1930s. A little after the Ashcan School, but maybe related a little to the Ashcan School, people like John Sloan, and I love I love their work, because again, it was very on-site painting, industry and life, and a lot of action and movement going on, and not overworking stuff. I have a lot of stuff that I think should be done way before it's done with a lot of painters. I just feel, but there is definitely a big tendency right now for hyperrealism. I think it's really in my humble opinion, it might be dominating a lot of the visual arts, but I was at Mass MoCA a couple weeks ago, and I wouldn't say it was dominating that over there, okay? But Reginald Marsh was just blew me away, and he did these amazing watercolors. He's known more for his egg tempera paintings, and a lot of movement and action, and my figure drawing has been, a guy I knew used to compare my figure drawing to Reginald Marsh, so like if you wanna like break into my Gmail accounts or anything, usually my name is Reginald, and I won't tell you what number goes with it. You know? They were calling me Reginald in the drawing group for a while. But I also like his industrial stuff and his watercolor. And another big influence. And then maybe my biggest watercolor influence ever, even though I may not have discovered him until a few years later. And this was a guy I never learned much about in college. When I was in college, John Singer Sargent was not in favor. You know, he was not. He was considered, you know, just a hack who painted a bunch of pictures for money. And, at least some people thought that. At least my teachers in college thought that, and it never, barely mentioned in my art history classes. But this is, I always say this is my favorite Singer Sargent painting. And even though he's an American, he did most of his work in Europe. And just the light and just how he handles white, it's just amazing. So that's another influence there. And then I wanted to put one guy who's still alive. Last I checked, he was born in 1933, so I have to keep checking here. And a guy named, an English artist named John Yardley, who I just think is a master of perspective and showing buildings and showing people relating to buildings. And even though his style is quite different from my style, I think he's a little less finished than I am. I just look at him constantly. I love his composition, his design, his movement. His color is much more muted than my color. He's much more into earth colors. Okay, now my work. Now we're getting. So how did I get going? So I kind of dropped out of the whole art scene for like 15 years or more because I was busy getting married and raising kids and doing all that stuff. But I kept painting. I never stopped drawing. I never stopped painting. I never stopped keeping my sketchbooks. I have sketchbooks that go back continually back to those days. Then I got back into painting a little more seriously, and I started painting a lot of the houses around Albany. This was actually in Slingerlands. And people often ask me, like, well, what grabs your eye? What makes you want to paint something? And I think maybe the first thing I see is the shape, the interesting shape or something. So you're going to see, I have a tendency to do a lot of Queen Anne's and a lot of churches and steeples and that sort of thing. And these even turned into kind of a lucrative gig here too, because I'd be out painting and people would come out and say, oh, can I buy that painting? You know, of their house, you know, and I started getting some house commissions, which I did for a few years, but I'm not a big fan of commissions. You know, too much of the artiste, I don't know, you know. But I do an occasional commission. So that was I was trying to find my style. Yeah, I was really trying to find my style here. And working on watercolor technique. Okay, that's another one in Slingerlands. This was the house, if you ever saw the movie Ironweed, they did some filming of Ironweed in this house. And again, I was just searching for style. Okay. Then, this was studio work I was doing. You can notice, if you can see the dates, I know these are not the best, it's not the correct screen, right, for this slide thing. We have this brand new slide projector, but we don't have the right screen. This is 98. I did most of these from photographs, although I definitely did some sketches. This is a bridge right in my neighborhood. It's an old concrete bridge from the 1920s that crosses the Norman Skill, going from Albany over to Elmsmere, Delmar. And I started using the bridge just to try out different techniques, just doing very wet into wet, loosening up, just trying, dumping salt onto my paintings, just doing technical experimentation, trying to really become good with the watercolor, trying to become good, that's not the right word to use, trying to become comfortable with the watercolor, trying to feel like it was my medium. I think by this point I had said I am a watercolorist. And that's the bridge again. You can see it getting very wet. This one I was starting to fool around with, trying to get some feeling of atmosphere. To this day, I'm always trying to create some atmosphere in my paintings. And I have to admit, I think I usually fail. I still want to be more atmospheric in my paintings. I get a little too hung up on some of the detail and the texture and the lines, the architectural lines, and I lose the atmosphere. But I want to get that atmosphere in. This is a terrible slide. This is out of focus here, but still you can see it. Oh, here's where I got a terrible case of poison ivy right over here. So bad that I had to go to the emergency room. I was sitting in there doing the bridge from the other side. So I was working on site at times, but these are larger paintings that I was working on in my studio. And from those paintings of the bridges, so I wanted to show. No, it's not going back. Okay. Okay. I also was working with, don't see it so much. Some down here, I was working with trying what they call masking fluid and block out, and trying different techniques with that, just fooling around. So again, I was just, anyhow, at the same time, when I was a kid, I was really into model railroading. And my railroad never ran though. It was just, the electrical wiring was just too beyond my feeble mind, and it would run for a while and then everything would break. But I loved the scenery and the buildings, and I just kept building the buildings and the scenery. And after college, I got back into it a little bit. I had a little N scale layout, and then when my kids came along, I think even before the kids came along, when I bought a house, I said, I'm gonna have a model railroad again. So I have an HO model railroad, which I just recently took apart, but some pieces of it are still in the basement. And my whole thing was like the scenery and the structures. That was my thing. And I just kept doing these things. And then when I started getting back into the local Albany art scene, I was thinking, is there some way I could maybe incorporate some of this stuff into my artwork? And as you'll see, if you've been into the show, you'll see there's two constructions on a basin there, which came out of my love of model railroading, or building the structures and scenery for model railroading. And then I would mount them on these constructions, these found art constructions, and add paintings to the constructions and graffiti and different things like that. And that grew out of this model railroad thing, and I've got some really horrible pictures of model railroad. Anyhow, this bridge thing was was my first artistic construction. I did this entire bridge with the Normanskill River, and then I had it on a big, it's still in my basement, a big giant stand and base. And I had a one-person show at the Spectrum Theaters in Albany, which was all those paintings of bridges, drawings of bridges. This was like way back in, I think it might have been 2000, it was the old owners owned it. The whole space was different from what it is now. That was my first construction that I did, that I showed as a work of art. I also had some reliefs some relief things that I did hanging on the wall. Anyhow, this was my model railroad. You can see it, not that, kind of an out of focus slide, terrible color. But you can see it was based on the Normanskill, and there were bridges and trees and all that good model railroad stuff. And I was incorporating buildings in the neighborhood into my model railroad. This If you've ever been down to the Normansville farm, that's the old Sherman barn that's down there. It's an old dairy barn. And then I was also doing some urban scenes on the model railroad with the old U-Haul building in Albany. Nipper on top of the building. That's not the real building that Nipper's on, but there was, I carved Nipper out of wood and painted him. And I'm just showing this to show you that how these little goofing around things that I did for fun would later on become part of my constructions that I show as structural pieces that have been, many have been in the Historic Albany Foundation's Built, their annual fundraising show called Built, which used to be called Vacancy, which focused on vacant buildings. That's where I started putting the constructions in. You'll see some of them closely. This was the old Albany Billiard Ball Company, right down the block from me, maybe a mile away, down Delaware Avenue. I live right off Delaware Avenue by the Spectrum Theater, if you know Albany. About a mile down the road was the Billiard Board Company, which was there when I first bought my house and moved in, but it wasn't there for long. And then one day it was gone. They just bulldozed it right down, took it down, and I just felt this feeling of like sadness, like why did they take that away? Why did they go? I mean, couldn't they have used it? Couldn't they have done something with it? And there's people here in the audience who know more of the history of Albany than I do, who probably could give me some better answers for it, but I still missed it. It felt like it was a person who went away, you know? And it had some historical value, I'll show you, okay? This is where the first plastic, celluloid, invented 1868 by John Wesley Hyatt, first used billiard balls at the Albany Billiard Board Company Plastics. Now, since then, I have read several other places are claiming that they invented plastic too, okay? And it's like, you know, everyone has the biggest ball of string in the country, you know, that kind of thing. Or the best, you know, there's those superlatives. But this is it, and what, ironically, I am a active member of Beyond Plastics with Judith Enck runs out of Bennington College, you know, always going down, lobbying the legislature to reduce plastic packaging and stuff. And I build so many of these buildings out of plastic too. You can't escape it. Our Beyond Plastic sign is made out of plastic. Okay? So what can you do? You know, it's inescapable, but we gotta try, right? So anyhow, so that was some of the history there. And that's what's there now. Okay, you can see it's a strip mall. But as Sandy pointed out to me, because Sandy was in the neighborhood longer than I was, I didn't realize that the top of that building there, they built it to look like the old billiard ball company.
Oh, interesting.
You know, and which I had never realized that. And I'll show you if you go back. See?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize that, you know? So there was a little nod to the history of the area when they built it. And then this thing here has been, for the most part, it's a little better now, but usually it's about 70 to 90% empty at most times. You know, they can't seem to rent those things out. There's a deserted Friendlies on over to the right too. That's now a cannabis dispensary, because we don't have enough cannabis dispensaries in Albany. This I had to put in, I know, has nothing to do with anything, but across the street from the billiard board company was Kuhne Funeral Home. And Joyce Kuhne was an old friend of mine. Joyce Kuhne was a retired art teacher, amazing painter, really good painter, but she gave it up for the family business, the funeral business. And but we've been in touch. And her husband Dan, who died a couple of years ago, she was trying to teach Dan how to do watercolor. So he was sitting across the street and he did this painting of the Albany Billiard Ball Company. So it's just, I just threw it in for fun. How am I doing on time?
2:38.
Oh, okay, I better move it along. Okay, vacancy. This is the very first, flyer for the vacancy, 2002. I know I've talked to local artist and photographer David Brickman and critic. he thought, wasn't it earlier than 2002? But all my records show 2002. I was in the show. I just saw an ad for it in Metroland, Call for Artists, in the old Metroland magazine, went in it. Turned out to be a gold mine because I met all these amazing artists and people. We were down at the old Center Galleries downtown Albany. There was only about 20 of us maybe, I don't know, if even that much, you know. I should mention that Pam Howard, the head of Albany, of the Historic Albany, is here with us today. That's why I keep looking over there to see if you can verify my dates and things.
It predates me, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, it goes back. And I met so many great people there. I'll show you some of the. Okay, and so I started focusing on the vacant buildings in Albany. I'd already done some of them, but then I really started focusing on vacant buildings. This is 102 Colony Street, which is off of North Pearl Street in Albany, and this another gold mine of I've just painted this building so many times. The church behind it is the Church of the Holy Innocents. A version of it is in the show in there. There's some versions of this building in the show in here. I did to complete my final big construction was the entire church, which is represented in this show. You can see the construction in there. I also did this. This is right around the corner from that. This was the. They actually were using this building as a church. They fixed this all up. It doesn't look like this anymore. It's still standing though.
No.
It's not.
That one's gone.
It is gone. We also have the Albany historian here, Tony Obaka. Thank you for coming, Tony. So I've got people checking on. You can fact check me, you guys. Just call me on anything because I'm terrible. Listen. I tell you right now, I exaggerate. I lie. That's just me. Okay. But this was a small, like, scale. From my model railroading thing, I tended to do these things in scale, the HO scale. And this was that building. I think it was called the Church. At that time, there was a sign on it called the Church of Modern Enlightenment. And this was in the show, the first vacancy show. That was a larger construction, not to scale. It was about this big, very large construction. That was in the show too. Back then, we could put 4 pieces in the show. Now I think it's down to 2.
Down to 2.
Yeah. With so many people, this is a big show now. It's called Built, and it is a major event. So, I gotta talk to David Brickman about this because this is how I met David Brickman, looking at this. David Brickman's important in the Albany art scene because he had a gallery in Albany way before there were any art galleries in Albany, or not many. And he ran a gallery in Albany for many years. If you want to see his photographs, they're still on view at McGreevy Pro Lab in downtown Albany. He tends to zoom in and get these really abstract textural kind of things, beautiful stuff. So we were talking about this painting, the Central Warehouse painting, the so-called eyesore of Albany here that everyone knows about. And even back then, we found the beauty in this painting. David swears it was a photograph, but I know I took a picture of it. It's a painting. So I want to talk, I got to let him know about that. This was a guy, Ken Ragsdale. What was coincidental, this was in the first vacancy show, and coincidentally, this was the view when you looked out my front window of the apartment that Laura and I first lived in when we were married. This was it. But what you can't see on this bad reproduction is there's these little dotted lines going along this building. It's kind of like you could take the building and fold it up, because he's really known for folded paper sculpture. To me, he's my favorite contemporary artist in Albany. Look him up, Ken Ragsdale. He's really cool. Does these amazing sculptures and stuff. And then he takes these digital photographs of them. It's cool stuff. Anyhow, this was one of his earlier works. He was still in grad school, I think, when he did this. Okay, these buildings, this is the old Albany Knitting Company on South Pearl Street. They're all gone. All those buildings there are gone. That's the construction of it. I got another painting of it too. like some of these don't want to click on. Okay, well there's the construction of it. This, I forget which year exactly this was, but I had 3 paintings of these buildings and this construction, and I pat myself, I did get best of show that year, you know, and that was way back. All of these are gone. What interesting story about this was at one point they were having some problems with zoning or whatever, or somebody had some kind of legal issue with that property down there, and Dominic Casolero, who was on the Albany Common Council at that time, this was about 10 years ago, Dominic is out of the area now, called me up and got in touch with me. They needed pictures of the buildings that were there. They didn't have any good pictures. So they used my paintings and my constructions as pictures to prove what was there. And I thought that was, so it actually served a purpose here besides art. Well, there's another part of the construction. And these constructions are how I got that ultra hyper realism out of my system, okay? Doing these constructions, they take hours and hours and hours. I can still see, and my hands still work, but I don't have the patience anymore, so I haven't been doing many of these things. I still fiddle around with them, but not like I used to. Now I'm showing you lots of buildings that are no longer with us. I got this terrible reputation that when I paint buildings in Albany, you better make sure that your insurance policy is paid. Okay? They're gone. This was on Morton Avenue. They were trying to save this building for years and years and years. You can see my style. You know, it's like I like to get big, broad brush strokes in. I like to get big, broad colors in. I like to get a dramatic composition and design. That's the same building from a different thing, not so dramatic. I also love to put the background in. I like to show you where the building is. And even when I do figure drawing, which I'm a regular figure drawing person, people always laugh at me because I don't just draw the figure, I draw the other people drawing the figure. I draw the studio around the figure. I figure I don't want to just show some naked person in the middle of the room. I want to show all the people around drawing the naked person. So, same building again. I guess I was fixated with this building, and it is now gone. You can see this is much, you know, trying to keep that life. These were all done on the spot. They were all done sitting in my car or sitting outdoors. That's the construction that came out of that building. It's also in the old, it might have been called Built by then. The show may have been changed to Built. A very tall column. I started calling these things columns. Somebody on the board of Historic Albany bought this and donated it to Historic Albany, and it's sitting in the storeroom in the back of Historic Albany. They put it out for display one time. I got to take a look at it, and there was a Calder sculpture touching it. I said, Calder Mobile was touching my sculptures. So that was like claim to fame. A little bit of a close-up there. So here again, how I took that model railroading sort of constructions and began to turn them into three-dimensional works of art. I didn't have a slide of it here, but I was very much influenced by, if you've ever been down to the old Whitney building, there's a little tiny construction, the name of the artist is slipping my mind here, I should know his name. In the stairwell of the old Whitney building, the old Breyer or Brewer building down there. And that made me think, oh, you could do little tiny constructions of buildings and call them artwork, you know, if you have the right thing. These buildings are all gone except for there's the Church of the Holy Innocents. I painted these in like September 2004, and I went back in October. I was going to do some more paintings. They were gone. So this I thought was funny. This was in the Built show a couple of years ago. I think I went to the Built show on Saturday, and they told me that Friday night they had tore it down. The Built. So that wasn't good timing at all. And then in that same show was this, the Kenwood estate, the old Doan Stewart thing.
This is why I worry.
Yes, this is why Pam worries it, you know, well, I haven't been out there painting, you know, don't worry, I won't paint the Hudson Avenue house there, you know. I won't paint that, otherwise it would be gone. Yeah, I was down there in the fall, and it was really bright, and it almost looks like it's on fire, but that wasn't intentional at all. It was just the, you know, the fall colors. I was just trying to express that thing, and I love the shape. Again, I think the first thing that grabs me is the shape, and then I look for interesting shadows and things. Industry, I wanted to just quickly talk about the, you know, how I got into industry. I would leave work around 6 o'clock in the summer and head right for the Port of Albany with my sketchbook and my watercolors. And I was just trying to, again, work on my watercolor technique. I was trying to refine, and my drawing skills, trying to get the idea of the three-dimensional drawing skills. And this is where you can see people like Reginald Marsh. I may have been influenced a bit by Reginald Marsh, Charles Shearler, Thomas Hart Benton, people like that. The social realists, they're definitely an influence on me. This is gone. These were molasses tanks down at the Port of Albany. They tore them down not that long ago. It was cool when you're sitting down there, you could smell the molasses, you know, you're painting, just smell it. And the bugs wouldn't bother me because they were so busy with the molasses, they left me alone. And my railroad interest there, this was Cargill had their own engine down there. Port of Albany had an engine, Cargill has an engine. I haven't seen this one in a while, but the Port of Albany one's here. That grain elevator is known, it was the largest grain elevator in the United States at one point. It's still down there too. This one might be familiar to some of you. This was studio work I did based on my Port of Albany stuff, and I did several versions of this. My brother owns one. I think Mike owns a smaller one, and they've been around. And I was just trying to get the idea of twilight and light coming, so a little bit different for me. I had fun. Then 2000. Let's see. Mohawk Hudson Regional. I decided to enter one of my constructions. This was 2014. This was in the Mohawk Hudson Regional. There was a lot of stuff about the back and oil trains were exploding and catching on fire, I think up in Canada, and they were coming through Albany, right through the center of Albany, and there was a lot of concern about that. So I took some of my structures that I've been working on from part of my railroad was Port of Albany, you know, so I took some of my constructions. There's the grain elevator. I got a whole bunch of these HO tanker things and put them on here. And in the background, this is a horrible picture. In the background, there's an acrylic paint. It's acrylic on Tyvek. It's of the Port of Albany thing. I was doing paintings on Tyvek. Kind of difficult to work on. I got the idea from Mass Mocha. Here's another view of that. I had tar. I dripped tar down the sides of these, and these were just pallets, you know, that I took from work where they were just piling up. This is called Power Number 3. This is the Glenmont. This is out in California, hanging in the office of the son of somebody who's bought a couple of my paintings. He told me his son works on renewable energy projects and that sort of thing. And he told me that his son always points up to this picture and says, "This is what we're trying to prevent." So I thought that was good. I did that in my studio, but I did it from sketches. And whenever I sketch these industrial scenes, I have to hide because they usually send security out to check on what I'm doing. And it's gotten, and this one here, you know, this one here is, this was another version of it, much looser, much more expressive, as you can see. Really, I was just going crazy with the colors and just trying to get the excitement. And then the bicycle rider there was a kind of an afterthought. That's sort of me. This is what happens when security catches you. This was there's a Saudi facility out there in Farrah Bush, And I was like parked there, you know, I wasn't hiding or anything, I was just parked there and I was painting this, and all of a sudden, well, I was just about done with the painting too, thankfully. Some security guys came and they made me follow them to their main office. And they told me I had to give them my sketchbooks. And I'm not gonna repeat what I said. And then they let me go. I always hear, the security guy, I hope that anybody working security here? They're kind of Rambo types, you know? And, it's happened to me at other places too, when, you know, just sitting on a public street, you know, and I'm painting some smokestack somewhere, you know, and I always say, you know, what are you worried about, you know? I can go to Google Earth and get all these pictures, you know, it's not like anything, but I was trying to get the idea of the atmosphere, the smoke, the industry. And then this one was the first prize one I did, and the story was with this. This was a bit more, no, this was the second first prize one I did, I think. And this is all gone now. This is totally gone, so I'm glad I got in here when I did it. And I was out painting, I was across the street painting, doing sketches for it. And the guy who lived in the house said that when he was a kid, at one point, somehow a pig got out and was running around his back. I don't know if it's true or not, but he said there was a pig running around his backyard, you know? And after he told me that, I was working on a painting, and I thought, well, maybe I just throw a few pigs escaping the thing there. So it's called Sausage Factory Revisited. So, and you can see the first prize backwards up in there. That's the way it was from behind. I was trying to get some atmosphere. Yes, that was the first one I just showed you. This was number 2. My son liked the painting. Oh, I know what it was. Yes. The first one sold almost immediately. It's actually owned by one of the Cristofolis from the Cristofoli food service thing. So they actually owned the first prize for a while there. The building, they owned the building. So that's why she bought the painting for her husband. And my son wanted it, so I did another version of it, a little tighter. This was totally studio, you know, it's a little less atmospheric. That's also where, if any Albany artists know, where Attila's frame shop was in that place. Right over in here. I mean, you thought nobody could even breathe, much less live. He had a frame shop in there. Attila was an Albany Institute. Okay, we're getting near the end here. I'm wrapping it up, okay? Suddenly, some of my paintings, and you'll notice some in there, you may notice a few tents and things of people who are haven't been able to find a home, you know. And there was one right behind. I've done a series of paintings of the Old Thatcher's restaurant on Delaware Avenue, which I think they're also trying to turn into a cannabis place. And it was a Vietnamese restaurant for a while. And back in the back, there was a whole tent encampment for a while, and I took some pictures of that. I did some sketches there. And but what started it, so anyhow, this is a sergeant, you can see, but he was camping in the Adirondacks with other rich guys. This is another artist who's influenced me, John Wharf. He probably would have been much more well known if he hadn't died quite so young. Again, the tents. But anyhow, this was a painting I did based on some sketches I did down in Washington, D.C. So now it's like the residences are becoming, I'm seeing more of this. And I've been showing more, so it's a little bit, I don't want to like be pushy about it, and you know, it's like, you know, if you look at the, there's a painting of the old St. John's Church in the show there, and if you look on the side, you'll see there's a few tents there. There's also a police car. The day I was painting it, the police showed up. They were called by the neighbors to remove these people. They were very nice, very polite. But anyhow, where am I going with this? I'm not really sure. You know, it's just, oh yeah, and you'll see some in the large painting of the central warehouse that's in there. You'll see but that's what I really like most about painting on site. You know, even if I do the the more larger finished paintings, if I do them in my studio, all the sketching, I see the life that's going on. I see the interaction of people with the buildings. I meet people who lived in these buildings, or their parents lived in these buildings, or their aunt or uncle, and they talk to me and I hear about them. I give away, a lot of times when they like the sketches, I just tear them out and I give it to them, you know. And they, you know, I'm not being generous. I figure, look, you know, I'm just trying, it's the process. The process is more important to me, and if they appreciate it, I give it to them. And, you know, I just get this sense of place, this sense of history, the sense of, you know, people lived in these buildings and worked in these buildings. The Beech Nut Factory, which is totally gone. How many thousands of people spent their entire careers there? You know, and I knew a couple. I knew a couple in my early days in Albany. It's supposed to have been a really nice company to work for. So, do we have time for a few questions? Or yeah, I don't. Anybody have anything they want to ask me? Hunter.
What's your average time of you doing like some of these quick
Average
sketches?
time of what?
Average time of doing some of these quick sketches that you.
Oh, the sketches, yeah. Most of this, when I talk about it, could depend. I could do a 10 or 15 minute sketch, or like the other day I was in like on Monday I was in Johnstown, and the weather was perfect, and I had the shady spot, and the sun wasn't changing much, so I sat there for like 2.5 hours doing it, and then I turned that into a painting, which I wanted. Which you can see that painting if you drive up to Gloversville and look in the Micropolis Gallery. It's up there right now. I painted to order, let's say, you know. But usually when I'm working outdoors, I usually hour and a half, 2 hours, because by then the lighting has changed so much. I also prefer painting in the winter time when the lighting is much more, the lighting's dramatic all day long in the winter time, you know, because the sun's lower, but it changes fast, so you have to work fast. Yeah, Chris, was it?
Yeah. What do you make your models out of?
Everything and anything. A lot of times I start with a plastic kit things, and then I cut them up, you know, the plastic kit models. But a lot of times I'll use wood, a lot of basswood and balsa wood and that sort of thing. Sometimes cardboard. Just about everything and anything goes into those models, yeah. Okay. Kathy?
I just love how you preserve the light. So like in a painting like this, with the lamp post, is there gouache in there, or is it?
Is there gouache?
Yeah.
No. I am my watercolor students, if I say to any one of my I don't have any watercolor students in here. Oh, I do have a watercolor student there. Oh, do you remember what my one rule is in watercolor? There you go. She just, no white paint. No white paint. So I'm a purist in that sense. I try to preserve the white paper, and I'll lift and scrape and scratch to get it. But I always also say that one of the secrets to watercolor, one of the so-called secrets, is just a lot. What watercolorists don't tell you, they do a lot of planning. You know, you really do a lot of preliminary sketches and drawings and plan. And if not, you do it in your head. So you know, oh, I gotta preserve that white space, or sometimes I fail. And so the simple solution in watercolor is you just do another one, you know, because you can't, it's not like oil paint. You can't just paint over it and do it again, you know. Kate.
You talked once before about not using black for portraits, or.
Oh, not using black?
Not using black, right? So
Yeah.
you said it was one of your exercises for one of your classes to do a portrait without using black?
I personally don't use black paint.
Right.
Okay. However, it's not one of my rules. If I have students who like to use black paint, I go right ahead. And there's been Sergeant used some black paint sometimes and stuff. I tend to like to mix up my blacks, like using a mixture of colors that, you know, basically combining all your colors. Like a typical example would be ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. That makes almost a beautiful black and grays. So that's what I do. I find it gives a more vibrant black. And I also do, my style is I tend to do most of my color mixing on the paper. I don't do a lot of color mixing on the palette. I do most of it, I wet down the paper, I put some burnt sienna on there, I put some ultramarine blue, I push it around a little, I add more, and eventually you see what looks like black there, you know, but it's
The
not.
effect is black.
Is what?
The effect.
The effect of black, which is really the you know, the presence of all the colors there, sucking in. Laura?
Do you have a particular time of day that you like to paint or sketch, or a particular type of light or cloud cover, sunny days?
You know what, now I don't. But for years, I wouldn't go out painting unless it was a nice sunny day, because I really wanted to see the shadows, and I wanted to see the darks and the lights and the contrast and all that. But I live in Albany. And it's like, trying to get 2 days, well, lately with this drought conditions, I get I can paint lots of days in a row it's sunny. But it started getting to the point where, oh man, I'm never gonna paint if I wait for good weather. So I started painting in the rain, and I actually got into it, you know, that's where I started getting into grays and mistiness and stuff. So now if I have the time and I feel like painting, it doesn't matter what the weather is, I go out and paint, you know. I actually had a painting at the Shaker Museum for the Colony Art League back in the spring of the barn, which I sat in my car while it was snowing and painted it while it was snowing. And that was fun, you know, that was fun. Actually, these questions are good because then I start talking about technique. I start talking about, you know, how I actually work, you know. Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Paul.